last but not least, bringing everyone to the table. So I'm now very excited to be able to say, if you are still here, we would love to have all of you join us in our lessons from aviation. We now have, I will bring on Courtney from the World Economic Forum and a few other people to get us started in the discussion around how we might bring everyone to the table in taking the next steps into this advanced air mobility industry. So welcome, Courtney. As you introduce yourself, I will bring up all of the other panelists so you can introduce them.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Chris, and to everyone at CAAM. CAAM has been such a big part of making, inclusion a big part of this new burgeoning field. So I'm really excited to be here today. For everyone who's here, welcome to bringing everyone to the table. And in the spirit of inclusion and that CAAM is hosting us, bienvenue aux amis francophones. Nous sommes ravis de vous accueillir aujourd'hui. My name is Courtney Radcliffe-Gill from the World Economic Forum's Aerospace and Drones team. I will be your moderator today, and you will see a brilliant cast of people who will be joining me, and I will be introducing them in just a moment. As a brief introduction, I've been at the World Economic Forum for around 3 years, focusing on AAM and specifically electric and hydrogen aerospace. Prior to that, I was on the government relations team at Rolls-Royce in the UK, and I initially started my aerospace journey in aerospace on the finance side as an investment banker at Merrill Lynch. So I've kind of seen the aviation sector from a government relations side, finance side, and now actually getting to the core of really bringing this to life. So I'm very excited to be here. And as just kind of a quick context for this is really about, who isn't here, but also how can we bring them here? So just as kind of estimates, there are estimated to be around 280,000 people employed in this space by 2035. And that's really not very many years away. And it's estimated to be a $115 billion industry that we have this incredible opportunity to shape and to really become, we get to see how we create this going forward. And if you can think about, wow, what if we had had this chance when we were first building cars or buses or something that's really an integral part to everyone's lives, and everyone deserves to be a part of making that happen. And not only from a user experience, but also from getting to be a part of building this. So I'm really excited to be here today, and I will do a couple of quick introductions here before we kind of are able to kick off a really exciting conversation here. So I will introduce Jeannie Lamb first, who is the Director of Strategy at Wisk, and that is their beautiful Cora flying behind her. And she leads their go-to-market strategies and is really a big part of driving Wisk's strategic efforts in bringing self-flying air taxis to the sky. And she is a long-term veteran of electrification and focusing on kind of that sustainability component of flying. And previously was at Nissan as a senior manager and many other roles working on go-to-market efforts for, you might know, the Leaf. And so has a big, background in understanding bringing electric options to the world and EV charging at charge points. And her kind of fun rule at home is that she only wants to have electric vehicles parked in her driveway, as really bringing that ethos home to her. And personally, I'd love to see the parallels between the auto and aerospace industry and what we can learn from things we did well and things we didn't do well 100 years ago, and how that'll be really important going forwards. And next, I will introduce Danielle McLean, who is the CEO of Happy Takeoff. She has a background in aerospace engineering and previously was the focal point for UAM in advanced product development at Spirit Aerosystems. In 2019, Danielle left Spirit to form Happy Takeoff, which is a hydrogen fuel cell eVTOL company, which I would personally love to learn a lot more about. I know there's a big future coming with hydrogen. And she's really excited, I know, to kind of rebrand, redefine, and recreate aviation and the aviation culture. For so long, it's had kind of a very, singular view of what you think of as a pilot or someone who's in aerospace. So I'm really excited to see what Danielle has to say about that. And then next on this panel, we have Mike Hirschberg, and we really want to make him feel welcome, because while you may notice he is the only man on this today, I fundamentally believe in Emma Watson's he for she, that men are a really big part of making this transition happen. And I personally think that we really need men at this table as equal partners in making this happen. So instead of excluding men, I really want to bring men on this journey. And so we're really delighted to have Mike here today. And he's an aerospace engineer and has been in the aviation industry for over 30 years. In the past 10 years, he's been leading VFS, the Vertical Flight Society, which was founded in 1943 as the American Helicopter Society. And in 2013, VFS was the first international organization to recognize the transformative potential of eVTOL, and has been bringing together a global community to tackle AAM topics ever since. And last, but most certainly not least, we've got Adrian Lindgren, who is the state and local partnerships lead at Hyundai's UAM division. And I've gotten to work with Adrian both when she was at the city of Los Angeles and also at Hyundai. And she has overseen over $1 billion in public-private programs and initiatives aimed at fostering local economic development, accessibility, and regional competitiveness in rural and urban environments. So I'm really excited to have you guys all here today for what's hopefully a great conversation, for making sure as we build this great industry that we have everyone here that we want to. So thank you so much for joining us today. And I'm going to kick off with a question that any of you can answer. What brought you here? Why are you here on this call and in this session? And I don't know if one of you wants to jump in on that first.
I have no problem
Sure,
going.
yeah, go Danielle. Nice hanging out with you again.
Yeah, good to see you as well. Thank you so much for those introductions, Courtney. And yeah, Jeannie knows I'm quick to jump. Sometimes I feel like I'm playing Jeopardy with my mouse and the unmute button. So the company that I came from, there was a real lack of diversity. And when I started Happy Takeoff, I thought, I'm going to start the most diverse aerospace company. And within a year, and I actually run that company with my daughter, who is biracial. And within a year, it was her and I, and the rest was old white guys. And no offense to those old white guys, I love them so much and they're great guys, but we realized it was really hard to find the kind of people that we were looking for, that, women, people of color. And we talked to some recruiters and we kind of were digging around. And yes, there are engineers out there, but in this space, it is just really hard to find. And so we started looking at why there was such a lack of diversity in aviation. And we kind of had this epiphany that we're at this point in time where everything is being reinvented. Aviation is literally being recreated in front of our eyes as we speak. And so, I can't remember whose quote this was, but the best way to create the future, or the best way to predict the future, is to create it. And so we just saw this opportunity to get involved, and yeah, one thing led to another, and here I am.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Danielle. And Jeannie, I know that you had a comment on that.
Yeah, no, it's nice to thank you for hosting, Courtney, and doing a great job getting us together. I like this little group to hang out. Yet the why I'm here is, as you mentioned in the intro, I did come from electrification on the ground. And when Wisk called, I was just like, absolutely. I was reading about this space for so long, and AAM and UAM, it's going to happen. And the reason I'm here in this group is because we've been interviewing and talking to a lot of great candidates, smart talent, diverse. And one of the things that are holding people back is the fear of not knowing whether this space is going to take off. There's a lot of that happening. It's like, is this going to be real? And it's real. So hoping that this forum and this whole platform is going to make sure that, you know, all of us coming together from the various industries and talking about, and from the industry itself, can really talk about how, you know, we need resources here. And it's not just about engineers, and we love all engineers, but it's more than just flying machines. You know, we want to bring people to the table. And I come from automotive, so it's just another great example of how, you know, beyond engineering, you have go-to-market, marketing, communication, marketers, great city planners like Adrian coming from a different space. You know, we've got a lot of work to do in public acceptance, and Anna spoke about that in the keynote really well. So that's why I'm here. I just want to make sure that people are removing that fear and willing to take that leap and take the risk.
Thank you.
I'll just add in, you know, I think one of the reasons I'm here today is as a person that did not, I'm an urban planner by training. I'm not an engineer. And I think that's an asset, but I don't necessarily think that's always been viewed as an asset. And I think in my own career, I sort of struggled to get a seat at the table sometimes, but getting a seat at the table is one thing. Feeling empowered to speak up when what you do with that seat at the table is in many ways just as difficult of a challenge as getting to the table. And so I was really interested to participate in this conversation today, really to try and help encourage and sort of break down some of the tough questions and tough challenges of why is it a problem to get people to the table in the first place, and what can we do to be effective once we've brought them to the table and elevating their voices and making them feel heard or not sidelined or insecure about speaking up, and to really show that leading with empathy is just as valuable a skill. Communication, translation, facilitation, what we call these soft skills, which I've probably more built a career around. You know, how do we rebrand that and think about how we bring those skills to the table and recognize them as just as valuable a contribution as the person who's, you know, building the aircraft itself?
No, that's definitely a very important point. You can be in a room or at the table or someplace you're supposed to be, but if you're afraid of saying something, it's a little bit better than nothing that you're there, but not a whole lot better. And so I definitely, you know, resonate with that that is a really key part of everyone feeling included. So I have kind of two questions. They're sort of the antithesis of each other. So the first one is, and I'm going to have a little anecdote that comes with this, is one, what
Courtney,
policies?
I'm so sorry, but did we want to hear it from Mike?
Oh, sorry, Mike, I was kind of waiting for anyone to jump in. Mike, please, I did not mean to cut you off.
Yeah, I was trying not to be overly assertive.
Please, you have an equal right to be assertive as anyone here.
I appreciate that. Sometimes I try not to be, well, I try to restrain myself, but I guess to answer the question, so I'm here because Danielle suggested that if you're trying to bring you know, more people to the table, you need to have more constituencies represented. And you know, I wrote down a whole bunch of stuff I'd like to get across today. You know, this is you know, men are a large part of, I'll say, the problem, and also a large part of the solution. So people need to be aware of you know, if you don't see the problem, then that's also, then you may also be part of the problem. But from, you know, leading what we see, this electric VTOL revolution, we've seen sort of a brain drain from the established kind of helicopter community as they're trying to hire hundreds of engineers to staff up for new military and civil helicopter programs. You know, the AAM industry is also trying to hire hundreds of engineers. So about a year and a half ago, we recognized that there's this crisis for talent. We need 10,000 more engineers to enter the workforce for AAM in the next decade. So 1,000 engineers a year. And where are they going to come from? They can't come just from the existing pipeline of, you know, 75% men. We've got to tap into all kinds of new and better engineering production, you know, pipelines. How do we get more employees? How do we attract more people to the industry? And it's more than just, you know, it's more than just diversity. It's the inclusion once they're in the workforce. And AAM is such a incredible opportunity, because a lot of new companies starting from scratch or starting from small teams, it's hard to change the employee makeup of 100-year-old or a 80-year-old company in any kind of relatively quick pace. So this is an incredible opportunity for women in AAM and more diverse and I'll say more traditionally disenfranchised constituencies to enter the workforce and to be included and embraced as key enablers of reaching this vision we have for urban air mobility, or AAM.
I'll just quickly say, I think that's also, we have a whole challenge, I think, in this industry of making aviation more of a household name in a whole lot more communities than we currently are. And I think we can view that bringing people to the table as part of a strategy towards giving sort of that gift and enthusiasm of aviation and extending it to a much broader group of people through that workforce pipeline buildup.
Well, thank you, yes, for those comments, and kind of following on from Mike says, which will segue into the next thing, that it is really, how can we branch out to a much bigger group of people? But if we're going to do that, my kind of questions are sort of two that come here are, what policies do you think would be genuinely useful to encourage people to join the aerospace sector, and not just kind of say, have sort of conversations that we're really, we're inclusive, we want people to be here. And I find often that a lot of things actually come down to policies that, because these are in many cases historically very old kind of companies or sectors, that a lot of times they're things people haven't really thought about. So I have a funny little story. My sister she went to the US Naval Academy and is a fighter pilot. And we're kind of a long generation of pilots here. My grandfathers were both pilots in World War II. And so it's been quite a few pilots in my family. But my sister happens to be expecting her first child. Both she and her husband are fighter pilots. And I don't know if you guys know this, but in the military, everyone has to buy their own uniforms. And I don't think most people know this, but it's in the United States military. All soldiers are responsible for purchasing their own uniforms. So my sister is pregnant right now and had to go buy over $1,000 of maternity uniforms. And it wasn't that the military is being especially like exclusive and we're like, oh, this is specifically for women who are pregnant so that they have to go buy $1,000 of uniforms they will never use again. It was that whoever designed the system that people have to go buy their own uniforms didn't think about them. And so I thought that there are so many points like this where I think many times people aren't being intentionally exclusive, but are there policies that we're just not thinking about that actually keep people away? And I don't, there could be a ton of things I know at companies that could be anything from daycare to, parental leave to, having paid reproductive health assistance to give women more choice in their family planning timeline, or, there could be, or in the military, maternity clothing. And I just think there are so many things here. So I'd be interested from all of your perspectives, are there policies that you think would be really useful to actually encourage people in this sector and make them feel more welcome? And I don't know if you guys have any experiences of those kind of on your own that you've encountered.
Yeah, I can share more benefits than policies at Wisk that I would love to brag about, because that's one of the reasons why I'm at Wisk, is we have a ton of great things like, they're not secrets, we share them in our benefits package, but like the 980 schedule that we have, the every other Friday that I appreciate more than ever as a mom of two. I have a 9-year-old and a 2-year-old, and with COVID and the pandemic, that every other Friday off is it's gold, having them locked up in the house for 2 weeks at a time, and then being able to give them some fresh air. Those are the type of things that, some people don't think about, like the time that we give back at Wisk to employees. And Anna talked about our employee groups, and there's a parent and caregiver community. It's a great place to go, literally a real safe place to go. And so those are just two examples of, what Wisk does. As we don't call them policies, they're more like benefits and how we bring great talent, attracting talent to our company. But I hope those are the type of things that other companies in the industry can start thinking about, where, it's not necessarily monetary. It's about the diverse employee base that we have, but also these wonderful types of benefits that companies just start thinking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to continue on this, but before we go off, I just saw a comment from Bill Johnson in the chat that said, including fathers with paternity leave. And I think, again, this is a really big element to this. So my mother's family is Scandinavian, they're Norwegian. And so it's really interesting to kind of hear from some of my cousins who live in Norway, some of the things that they have, which have some very long paternity leaves, which I always found was a really interesting dynamic compared to in the United States. And a big part of that is they said, well, if men can share an equal burden from a very early age in parenting, that really allows women to have that space to join. And I think that those are the kind of things that are often overlooked, that sometimes the focus is only on the female part of it, but a lot of times, as Bill brought up too, that we need to be giving these in equal fairness to men as well, so that they can be the fathers that they want to be and be present as well. And I know that having many friends who are just kind of starting to have children now and want to be really present fathers, I think that's one that I hear about a lot. And on my team at work have a lot of new dads. So that's something I want to flag for people doing HR policies for their companies, to not forget about the dads out there. So sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt on that, but I saw that comment and really resonated with that.
That was good.
I just say when my first son, when my first child was born, the company I worked for at the time, I said, I want to use my sick leave. I've got 4 weeks or 8 weeks, whatever, of sick leave. I want to take off for a couple of weeks from my son's birth. And it's like, well, you're not sick. Like, no, my wife's in the hospital, she's going to the hospital having a baby, kind of take some time off. It's like, well, you're not sick. You can't, you got to use your vacation. So I think, that was 24 years ago. So people are hopefully more open than that, but there needs to be more accommodation, I guess, more equality.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I think that the most important policy that we could have would be creating a space in the workplace to talk about these really tough issues. A lot of United States universities didn't allow women to get engineering degrees, some of them into the 1980s. And I just learned the other day that women weren't allowed to get a line of credit until 1976, I think it was. That's pretty crazy. And that's, in a lot of our lifetime. And so I think what we're seeing happen in the workplace right now is kind of the after effect of some of that really, discriminatory stuff that happened to women in the past. But I think the key to healing from that and going forward is we have to be able to reflect on ourselves and look within ourselves and see what our own implicit bias is. We all have it. We're like computers, we're like sponges, and we absorb what we're around, whether that be our upbringing, our current work culture. And a lot of times we think that bias is like an on or off kind of thing, where either you're racist or you're not racist, or you're sexist or you're not sexist, but it's not really so binary like that. And a lot of us have implicit bias that we're not even aware that we have. And then we end up being really resistant to having those conversations because we don't want to feel judged or embarrassed or shamed. So I think creating a space where we can be vulnerable, and Harvard did this study. Harvard has a test. I'll put it in the chat here in a second. It's called the implicit bias test, where you can you can go on there and take this quiz, and you can do one on race, gender, LGBTQ, ableism, ageism. They have everything you can imagine, and then it'll tell you, how biased you are. And surprisingly, I slightly prefer white people over people of color. And admitting that, I mean, I took the test and those are the results. And I would have been the person to say, I'm not racist. I'm not capable of being racist because I have a biracial daughter. But it turns out, I've absorbed some of that bias. And when I did the gender one, I associate women more with being at home than in the workplace. And I grew up with the stay-at-home mom. So, you know, that's probably where that came from. So I think a good place to be would be for us to, you know, take a quiz like that, and then for us to come together and say, hey, this is what I learned about myself. And that doesn't mean you're bad. And that doesn't mean that you're not welcome. And then just creating a safe place where we don't, you know, point fingers and say, hey, shame on you, but we'd say, let's all, you know, grow, work together and heal from that. So that's a really long answer of saying that I think some sort of policy where, you know, everybody took a quiz like that, and then we talked about it maybe, you know, once a month, and we all talked about what we learned about ourselves and how we can, you know, get out of our comfort zone and work with other people. Because, you know, it's easy to work with people that look like us, but when we're uncomfortable, we grow, right?
Yeah, it took the words out of my mouth.
That was awesome,
Danielle.
Danielle. That was a great, absolutely, talking about it more. And thank you for sharing your personal experience. That was a lot.
Yeah.
And let me just add, you know, I admit I have all kinds of biases, right? I mean, we have to do the introspection and say, these are the biases that I have. And like you said, how to get out of your comfort zone and grow and say, okay, I see this, but because of this, I'm going to do the right thing. I'm going to look at I understand my own limitations, because we all have our own, we all have limitations. I examine my limitations, and based on that information, I'm going to do the right thing. And that's where we grow. And then it becomes more and more part of ourselves. And we can hopefully control or reduce those biases.
I think it's also, I'll say shout out to the recruiters like on our team. I think one of the things as I've been hiring recently that was really, really helpful for me was a third party perspective and coaching when bias is emerging that I may or may not like. We can work in bias training, right, for 10 years, and people will still accidentally, to your point, Danielle, right? You don't really think of yourself as a candidate to do it. And even in my own experience, recently, I have found that kind of embedded process of having someone coach you through where you're seeing bias inflection points and then being able to reorient around that, I think is critical. And the only other thing I'll say around policy, I think something that we've seen in the pandemic is that, and I personally have always felt this, right, that I had to make a choice in life between, would I ever have kids or do I want to have a career as a woman? And I think that's not just true for women. I think that's true for anyone who's going to be the primary caregiver. And this is a little bit of a uniquely North American problem in some sense, where we have a particularly bad infrastructure at a governmental level to support. But I've seen so many men and women over the course of the pandemic and over the course of my career make decisions that are very tough. Either they're the breadwinner and they have to make that choice, or even if they're not, right, there becomes a question around cost of childcare. Does it make sense if I'm paying my entire salary to someone else? Am I going to have to go on disability for 6 weeks and that's all the maternity leave I get to be paid 25% of my salary? I mean, I think, and we have watched people just drop out of the workforce in droves for that problem. And we've lost a lot of the gains that we've made over the last 25 years in employment diversity. So I think, reemphasizing flexibility and remembering, and I think it kind of goes back to leading with empathy, remembering that people are whole people outside of their work. I think especially in the States where we tend to sort of, put work front and center, and it sort of becomes this easy excuse. If you can't go to something, work always takes precedence. And so I think it's a cultural shift that hopefully also being inside of each other's homes over the last year, proverbially, will help facilitate as we move forward.
No, I mean, these are all really fantastic points. And again, kind of the really being honest about everything within yourself and what you're thinking, Danielle. I really appreciated that element of it. And I think a lot of times because we all know we have them, but I think a lot of times we're embarrassed to admit it to other people that we're like, oh, I think, you don't even realize it, but at the end of it, you're like, oh, maybe I do think less of that person than this person, and you shouldn't, and you don't know why you do, but as a result of, but I think that if you don't ever admit it one, to yourself, but two, to other people, and are able to kind of like openly be like, oh, ask someone at the office, like, hey, do you think I treat people differently? And like, can you point out to me if you think that I do, or things like that. But I think the point that Adrian said is particularly relevant in this kind of COVID era. And again, I really encourage everyone who has, you know, kind of those powers within their company or to bring them up to their company. A lot of kind of HR policies that you kind of think are just HR policies, things like parental leave, and again, some of the things we had talked about, of even, I know a lot of women in particular feel that they, you know, they have this choice to make of even like, oh, should I advance in my career? Should I have kids right now? I'm not quite ready to have kids right now, or I want to have kids right now, but I don't think I've made it far enough. And, you know, whether it's welcoming moms back into the workplace, or, you know, whatever it happens to be, or dads back into the workplace as well, if they were the ones who chose to be the primary caregiver. And I think sometimes, you know, we think, oh, if we leave for 4 years while our children are really young, you know, we're not going to be able to come back in a senior capacity at all, or we're never going to really be able to make it anywhere. And so I think that there are a range of policies there that often relate to parenting, because it's such a big part of our lives. And so I definitely encourage everyone who has kind of that capacity within their companies to really take a look at, you know, are your policies allowing people, both moms and dads, to kind of be the best versions of themselves at home and with their kids, but also maybe even take time off, whether that is for short periods of time, a couple months, or whether that's, you know, to be able to leave for 1 or 2 years and, you know, be able to welcome them back in maybe a new role, but to be able to welcome them back to your company. So these are all really great things. And I know I'm kind of the one asking the questions, but I'll start with Jeannie. Do you have something in particular that you're really keen to talk about, or that's something that is really big for you in this space?
Yeah, I would say I do have a lot of women, and it's kind of a continuation of Adrian and Courtney, your point about the benefits of parenting, but also the one I have is like, I'm curious because I have a few women that come to me all the time. It's like, you had 2 children, you've had such a long career. How did you make it all happen? And one of the key things that some women are afraid to talk about is fertility. Like, literally, I was what do you call it? What was the horrible term that they call me? Over 36 having a child. And it was like, I was like, yes, I am old. And like, there's
they give you a name like geriatric.
Yeah, it was geriatric. Thank you,
like,
Courtney.
Thank you.
I was like, geriatric, thanks. Geriatric twice, thanks. I was like, but now that I've seen so many more companies with policies that come and provide fertility treatments and incentive, you know, providing that is, and it's really not across the country or global, right? Some Canadian provinces actually support this subsidy, and some private companies are starting to do this, but it's just not enough. And like, so there's things like coming back to work and all that, but what about the other side, right? You've got women who want to push their career, and I'm an example of that. I wanted to push my career for as long as I could, but also have children and have it all, eat all the cake, icing, you name it. And, you know, when some companies like the one that my husband's at provides fertility, it's something, and I just want to ask the whole audience, that everyone who's watching, it's like, have you thought about that for your company or organization? You know, this is an extra policy benefit, whatever you want to call it, that really could draw people to the space.
I don't think I could highlight and underline this anymore as someone who is kind of in that peer set right now of many of my friends. In fact, all of them have brought this conversation up to me, and it's something people are usually quite embarrassed to talk about.
Right.
But also is one of those things that not only do women also have to kind of find the 2 to 3 weeks of time to go do this, and it is not, you know, from all accounts fun, but in addition to that, every time you need to do this is around $15,000 to $20,000, depending on where you do this. And it's a burden that both on the time, the, you know, not being particularly enjoyable, and on the financial aspect that we're putting that burden, for example, completely on women. And most of my male friends, one, don't even think about it, and two, they're like, if you talk about it with them, they're like, oh my goodness, I feel so badly about that, I never thought about it. And again, like, even the financial assistance as well as some time to help women do this, it completely changes. Because again, if women are in their their late 20s, early 30s, mid 30s, and they're not ready to have kids right now, something like this can be completely life-changing to allow them to have kids at different points in their lives. So I would definitely put a star on that one, Jeannie.
Yeah, honestly, I'll just say, I mean, as this conversation evolved with my wife and I mean, I will definitely say that a game-changing benefit that I received when I voiced, when we were kind of talking about policies and what do people want, what are we not thinking of as we, come out as a brand new company. That was an incredible benefit that really, from an attraction perspective, right? I think we start to think about these benefits as costs in a certain way, and we can reframe that conversation really to be more about like every company is having trouble with retention in some form or fashion, and that is a costly problem in and of itself. When you look at how much it costs to replace and retrain someone, and I think the more that you can view and it gives you a different sense of loyalty to your company, and a different sense of allegiance to a certain extent, for feel like you're being taken care of. So I also, those are those kinds of benefits where maybe we don't think about them all that actively, but they can make a huge difference, even if it is to a relatively what we would call smaller number of people.
Yeah, building a new industry. Let's build this industry with all that learning, right? And set a really good example for not just aerospace in general, but all the other industries and all the people that are watching that are not from aviation.
Yes, please. And another comment that I just saw from Bill before it kind of goes away from the chat here, that he had talked about, and this is kind of onto a new segue, but one of the things that I always find is a really interesting one that I think people have different feelings on. He said, I had a rising star woman engineer who worked for me. She was offered the opportunity to shadow a senior executive at the company, but declined because she didn't want special treatment for being a woman. Do you think this was her best choice? And would many women feel this way? And I would love to hear some people's opinions on this. So my first job, I was an investment banker at Merrill Lynch in London, and I was the only girl on a floor of 180 plus men. And it was always really interesting because every time they needed anything that had to do with like diversity or this or that, they're like, Courtney, come here. And, like constantly I was like, I think I spent like 4 days of the week going to like different this or that because they're like, we need a woman. And I always think this is an interesting one in creating change. And at the World Economic Forum, for example, we've committed now to, when we have panels, to not having all male panels. And I personally have some kind of up and down views on some of this, but I do think it's really important to consider inclusion and make sure that we are, offering the opportunity to everyone. But sometimes I know that I always feel a little bit weird and singled out when they're just like, oh, we need a girl for this. And I'm curious if other people have thoughts on this, of how they feel about having kind of special like mentorship programs for women or whatever, or if that actually kind of goes the other way where it makes them feel like they're weird and that they shouldn't have been there in the first place, and that's why they need special help.
I want to call that girl that Bill's talking about and say, go back. It's a little bit about that fear that I mentioned earlier, right? The fear of like coming into the industry, the fear of, maybe getting a great opportunity to have a mentor at an executive level and declining it. And I would just want to help her go back and say, I want to do it again. There are, mentor programs from my past experience in automotive. They're sometimes not the best design, and there's all different variations of mentorship. But I don't know if necessarily that that was a mistake from that young lady's choice. I think it was just her natural reaction and that fear that we all need to help coach folks through. I don't know. What do you guys think, Adrienne, Mike, Danielle?
Go ahead, Adrienne. Go ahead.
No.
Well, this could be a slightly controversial answer, but I think part of our implicit bias is we often want to think for women. And Bill, I'm not saying that's what you were doing, so forgive me if it wasn't, but I tend to think, give people as much autonomy as possible and trust their choices. And so if that was her choice, I don't think any of us have enough information about her to comment on, what choices she made for her life or not. There could be a lot of other factors that we don't know of. But also to Courtney's point about feeling kind of singled out in diversity, we've all probably felt like that often. I know, people of color often have to feel like they're, representing their entire race. And we often feel like we're representing our gender. And I love those opportunities to kind of speak up, but also there shouldn't be, one or two people that fill those voids. Mike and I were talking last night about the, you know, put your actions where your pictures are. Mike, do you remember what you were saying last night?
Yeah. So, you know, great conversations. So, you know, you look at, so the eVTOL industry, the AAM industry is hiring. I mean, hundreds of, you know, job requisitions at the leading companies, trying to hire engineers and everybody. And, you know, you look at the executive boards, you know, the senior VPs and executive vice presidents of the companies or whatever, and, you know, some of them are not very diverse, right? And you know, I think diversity of backgrounds and worldviews is critical to solving problems, and that, you know, having representation of different demographics is really important at the top levels. And then you look at the pictures they have on the website of who, you know, of young people they're trying to recruit, and they're extremely diverse. They're the most, you know, calculated, you know, Shutterstock pictures you could find to have diverse groups, and that's great to have that vision. But, you know, I know a number of women PhDs that I shouldn't say a number. I know a number of women PhDs, but I've heard tales of people that they'll go to a traditional aerospace company and they'll be there months without another woman in one of the engineering meetings. So inclusion, and, you know, that's great to have that vision, but you need to hire. You need to do these things we're talking about here to make people feel included, and build that percentage of women. I think, you know, you need to have 40% women to be really effective, and have women feel safe.
50.
And yeah, so all these things are really important things, and we really need to look at these things. And like I said, get out of your comfort zone, all you men out there. You know, think about this, and how you can grow, how your company can grow. And if you're not doing this, if you're not thinking about how you can have an inclusive environment, then you're not going to succeed in the 21st century of AAM developments.
Yeah, and you got to look at that cap table. A lot of companies, they talk highly about diversity, but look at the leadership, look at the stockholders. If they're all men,
Right.
it's kind of irresponsible for the leaders to not have figured out this diversity thing, because it's not going to happen organically. We have to actively step out of our comfort zone and intentionally make diversity happen. And so if it doesn't happen at the top level, it's not going to happen at the bottom level and trickle up. It's got to start at the top.
I'd also just add, I mean, a couple of things, because I think, Mike, you brought up a good point about perspectives. If I got one more event invitation where it's like, we're looking for women and people of color, and we'd love to engage you, I'm like, you could just say, we're looking for diversity of perspectives.
Right.
Right. Which diversity, we have a lot of problems to solve in AAM.
Yes.
And diversity of perspectives is really the only way, because this is such a multidisciplinary effort, that's going to happen. And so I'll just say two things on that. One is, you know, I remember going as part of an LA contingent to visit an OEM at one point in this space, and we looked around, and it was, the whole contingent was of women and people of color. And when we visited, you know, there was not one woman, not one, right? So there's a certain amount, and you lose an audience really quickly.
Yeah.
Right. And so I'll say that, coming from the city, and coming from a city like Los Angeles, where we have a very high priority on equity.
Yeah.
Engaging, and this I think goes back to Jeannie, some of your points around engaging urban planners, mobility, you know, folks who already are in the conversation, have a vested interest in creating equity, I think is one way. And just on the mentorship, you know, mentorship has been the thing that absolutely made every part of my career. And I think it's really important for people, whether it's male mentors, female. That was true when I was at WSP, when I was at the city, when I was working with Goldman Sachs, when I was in graduate school. I always tried to find and cultivate a mentor, and that person always became instrumental in putting me in places of visibility. And everyone needs that advocacy.
Right. Don't wait for that program, right, Adrienne? Don't wait for a program before you find a mentor, and you don't have to just have one, right? You can, yeah. Mm-hmm. Right.
And so I just think that's, you know, as we think about bringing people to the table, we can't underestimate, and I think there's a lot of data that looks at this, right? The value of sponsorship in a young person's career and getting them to where they need to be.
Yeah, if I could just go back to the comment that I think it was Bill Johnson had brought up about, not doing the executive thing. I mean, I did that when I was a young employee. I got assigned to a senior executive, and I didn't think that they were picking me because I was a guy. So, take
You were
those.
bright, Mike. You were bright and shiny.
Maybe. But you got to take those opportunities. Absolutely, mentors are so critical, and I've had the great fortune to work for a lot of women and really key women in my career, and it's you need to have mentors. You need to have people that you can look up to and to help nurture your career.
Excellent. Well, I don't know. I know that I kind of started with Jeannie, and we've sort of been kind of going around, but I know that we only have about 10 minutes left, and I don't know if Chris is here to wrap anything up for the last 2 to 3 minutes, but I wanted to give you guys the chance if there are kind of things you want to address. I know Mike said he had a lot of things he wanted to talk about. We have about 10 minutes left, so I just kind of wanted to give us that little time slot if you want to bring anything up in particular before we go.
I think there's some great questions just in the Q&A if you want to quickly review those. And I think there's an incredible group here that's been asking some great questions, and I'm sure that the experience in the room here will have some great answers.
So very annoyingly, since it is, we like to have our tech all work, I actually got kicked out of the room and disappeared for a few minutes. And with that, all of the Q&A disappeared. So I don't know. I'll have Adrian, would you like to pick a question in the Q&A since I cannot see them and read one out?
Yeah. Let's do this one from Eleanor. I recently watched a UAM Zoom conversation where the subject of diversity, which was billed as a highlight, was shut down and rolled over, perhaps because it is uncomfortable. How can we make sure this does not happen in the future AAM industry conversations and seminars? And I picked that question because I think it's a challenging one, but also a good one for us to address. And I'll just kick off by saying, I think we speak in a silo in this industry. We go to a lot of events where we're talking to the same people,
Echo chamber.
Echo chamber, yep. And I mean, certainly the way that I've tried to approach it is to take a more localized approach and build more engagements that are based in a city or in a region and saying, how does AAM look in this particular place? And in doing so, you tend to activate a different group of people because it comes to life for them. So I think trying to bring it to people and try and partner with different types of organizations, right? Different types of local, whether it's nonprofits, facilitators, mobility groups, whatever it is. I think trying to target a diversity of organizations that we engage in these conversations might help, support that conversation. Because I think if you have a whole lot of people that have kind of never talked about it and they're not used to, and they're used to talking about the same thing to each other, it does get bowled over because it is uncomfortable and they don't really know what to say and they don't feel like they're the representative. And so it just sort of, it falls off the agenda all of a sudden very quickly.
One thing I would probably add to this is sometimes, and I think it really depends on who's presenting it. One thing I would like everyone to keep in mind when you're having these conversations is that they are very important to have, but a big part of the reason I think they get overlooked is sometimes I think there can be quite a negative tone that comes to, in particular, white males. And I know that I work on an all white male team and they are all wonderful and they're all really supportive of me and they, give me all the opportunities. They certainly don't treat me any differently. And I know that just having some private conversations with friends of mine, from university, wherever, who live all over the world, they say it's really hard for them to engage in conversations because they feel like I'm already a bad guy because I'm white and because I'm a man. And I know that obviously I am white. And so I kind of have half of that. I don't have the male aspect of that. And I know that for me, it doesn't make me feel great either when people kind of throw things down at me that are like, you're automatically kind of a terrible person because you're white. I know that that's not what people mean, but I think sometimes that tone comes across. And so I guess the one element I would say is be really inclusive of the fact that there are a lot of really great white men out there as well. And bring them into the conversation in a way where we're really happy you're here too. And I think that that's an important part of diversity is making sure that everyone feels happy to be there and that it's not an us versus them or a you versus that person. It's really that we're trying to get the best people from everywhere who've had a really great array of perspectives and lives. And I think that just is, instead of making it such a kind of vitriol against different people, is really making it kind of a happy, inclusive topic. And I think that that's probably one thing I've noticed with some male friends who come to me and they're like, I don't feel like I can say anything here, even if I have opinions. So
if I can just jump in, I've heard that too, Courtney. And you know, in a lot of the conversations that I've had around this topic, I often will hear people say things like that before anything negative has been said even. And so I think it's really critical to two things. One, to make sure we're doing it with compassion, right?
Right.
But also, and this goes for any side of politics, because this country, you know, we're a hot mess right now, but you know, if somebody's getting their narrative from either side of Fox News or CNN, where you have Fox News kind of saying, well, I'm looked at as the bad guy for the white men, and then you have CNN saying you are the bad guy, but just stepping away from all of that and saying, look, I just want to get to know you as a person.
Yeah.
And some really beautiful conversations can take place. And so
absolutely.
I try to ask people, you know, is that what you think, or is that what you've heard other people say? And if you do think that, tell me, why do you think that? Like, what happened to make you think that? And then as far as, and just I'll go ahead and answer the next question too, because it kind of goes in line with this, of how to get men to be more open to recognizing the problems, from Melissa James. I believe in starting at the top and then working my way up. And an example of that is Mike being here. You know, instead of trying to reach, you know, an entire, you know, middle management type of organization, start having these conversations with people like Mike Hirschberg and CEOs of the company. And I think when people see really strong role models doing the right thing and seeing that it's safe and it's welcome and it's open and we can be vulnerable, then I think it can create a really big impact, versus, you know, taking a lot of people that are kind of afraid and not really sure where it's going to go, from the women and the men, you know what I mean? The feeling, you know, that being vulnerable isn't safe, because being vulnerable takes courage. And so anyway, that was a long-winded answer, but I think the way to really create change is to get very high profile people, men, to you know, lead by example, and then showing that, you know, we're not shaming and, you know, blaming and all of that sort of thing, and get people engaged in the conversation.
And I'll just throw in there as an old white man that you know, these are uncomfortable conversations, but that's okay, right? I mean, you got to stretch out of your comfort zone, and you got to recognize, you know, as I said before, your implicit biases, where we are today in society, and how we can improve as people, as companies and organizations and a society. And it's a huge inflection point here today that we can work towards achieving the vision of the future that we all want.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think such a big part of this comes from really taking and understanding in everyone else's shoes. And that doesn't matter if you're the person who, you know, they're, you know, is kind of the person who's already there, the incoming person, or what gender or color you are. I think it's really understanding that we're all going to have things that make us uncomfortable about this. We all, you know, we all kind of fall on a different part of this spectrum of what's happening, and we all have different things that we're uncomfortable with. And so I think it's being patient, but like you said, encouraging, and allowing everyone to feel comfortable in these spaces is such a big part of having this grow. And I know that we have about 2 minutes left. So from kind of the panelists, I don't know if there are any kind of closing thoughts that you just want to say. Otherwise, I think we will probably be closing the session just so that we don't run over.
Look, the five of us made uncomfortable comfortable. So I think if our five of us can do it in such a short amount of time, can you imagine what we can do if we expanded this across the industry? So thank you to all you.
Yes, thank you to all of you back. Thanks to CAAM for having this session. How powerful, how amazing. I think we're going in the right direction.
Yeah.
I'll just say this was really, really great conversation. I really appreciate all the perspectives here and all the perspectives of the attendees and for those who tuned in. And big thanks to JR and Chris and the CAAM folks for elevating this important series of topics.
Great. Well, thank you so much to everyone for attending. I know we had a lot of people from all over the world on here today, and it was a lot of fun to talk to all the panelists here today. And I think we did bring up some really interesting points from across the board. And again, some of those topics we brought up, if you're in the position at your company, or even if you don't think you are, bring them up to somebody to really kind of engage and think if you can help make your company more welcoming again from any of the, fertility or paternity leave or whatever it happens to be. Go back to your companies and see what kind of change you can make and keep making steps forwards. And again, thank you so much to all of us to you guys for joining us here today. And I hope I see you either at another CAAM event or another event. The aerospace world's a pretty small world. So I hope I see all of you again soon. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Courtney.
Bye.
Thank you, Courtney. Bye, guys.